She boarded the plane like anyone else, poised, polished, unnoticed by the masses, but quietly magnetic. Her copper-toned braids tied back with precision, her coat folded neatly over one arm, and a silver case clutched in the other. No fanfare, no demand, just presence. Yet from a moment she stepped into the cabin, something shifted, not in the air, but in the eyes of the crew. It was the way they looked past her, spoke over her, and treated her requests as inconveniences rather than entitlements. What began as subtle disdain soon spiraled into something more sinister, a deliberate campaign to reduce her, humiliate her, silence her. But what no one on that flight knew, not the smirking flight attendant, not the whispering passengers, not the captain nodding along, was that the woman they targeted wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was something else entirely. And by the time the wheels touched down, the entire aircraft would come to realize they'd underestimated her in the worst possible way. Before you dive in, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if you were on that flight? Let's talk. This story isn't just about justice. It's about what happens when silence meets truth at 35,000 feet. Thalassa Brink stood at gate B-22, balancing her coffee in one hand and steadying her elderly Aunt Rowena with the other as the boarding call for first class crackled over the intercom. Her suitcase rolled smoothly behind her, every inch of her presence calm, precise, professional. Her gray wool coat hung open over a soft lavender blouse, and her Cartier briefcase gleamed faintly under the terminal lights. She was the picture of effortless poise. It had been a long week in Chicago. Negotiations with difficult partners, hours of silent power games in executive boardrooms. Thalassa was no stranger to pressure. But today, all she wanted was a peaceful flight home to Seattle. A quiet window seat in first class. Space. Warmth. Her Aunt Rowena shuffled beside her, leaning on her cane, her breathing shallow but steady. "We'll be seated in no time," Thalassa murmured. "And then I'll get you some chamomile tea, and we'll sleep the whole flight." Rowena smiled. "I'm fine, baby. Just happy to be with you." As they reached the front of the line, the boarding agent glanced at their passes and waved them through. The woman at the plane door, however, did not. Velma Krieger, head flight attendant, wore a bulletproof smile. Her eyes moved from Thalassa to Rowena and then to the boarding passes. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone implied the opposite. "We're in 2A and 12D, Thalassa said, handing over both passes. "I was hoping we could sit together. Maybe just move my aunt to the empty seat beside me?" Velma scanned the passes, then handed one back with a tight grip. "We don't upgrade economy passengers without status." "But I paid for both," Thalassa explained. "Full fare. I booked them at the same time. I didn't even use miles." Velma's smile stiffened. "Family members aren't upgrades. Airline policy." "So the seat beside me stays empty?" Thalassa asked evenly. "Correct," Velma replied, stepping aside. "Enjoy your flight." It wasn't the first time Thalassa had heard that tone. It said, "I don't believe you. You don't belong here." But she had trained herself not to react. She led her aunt down the aisle, helped her settle into 12D, kissed her forehead, and returned to 2A. 20 minutes later, just as the last group began boarding, Thalassa heard laughter. A young white girl, maybe 19, all neon lip gloss and oversized Louis Vuitton hoodie, bounced into the cabin holding a frappuccino like it was a trophy. She squealed at Velma like they were sorority sisters. "You got me the window," she grinned. Velma beamed. "Seat 2B, right next to a lovely view." She handed the girl a flute of mimosa, compliments of the crew. Thalassa turned, watching the girl settle into the seat beside her, the one she had specifically asked for her aunt to use. "Excuse me," Thalassa said quietly. Velma turned, blinked. "Yes. I asked if my aunt could sit in this seat. You said it was blocked." "That's correct." "But now it's not?" Velma's smile dropped. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult." "I'm not being difficult. Your ticket was issued for one first-class seat. If you'd like your companion upgraded, you'll need elite status or pay the fare difference. This seat," she nodded toward the influencer, "was released for last-minute priority. But you said it was blocked." "Things change," Velma said coolly. You're welcome to review the policy online." Then, in a whisper loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Some people don't understand what premium actually means." A ripple of amusement passed through the cabin. The girl in 2B popped her earbuds in and gave Thalassa a smirk. "It's fine," she said. "I like the window." Thalassa sat back, eyes on the seatbelt sign. Her fingers curled tightly in her lap. She didn't respond. Not yet. She waited. 20 minutes into the flight, Velma returned. "We've had a passenger complaint," she said in a hushed tone. "You've made others uncomfortable." "What?" "You question crew judgment. That's a safety concern." Thalassa stared at her. "I asked about a seat." "Ma'am, do not raise your voice." "I didn't." Velma suddenly reached for her tray table, slapped the boarding pass she'd earlier discarded onto it. "I've already logged this as a disruption. Please remain silent for the remainder of the flight." Across the aisle, a businessman adjusted his headphones. A woman in 1C looked away awkwardly. When beverage service came, Thalassa was skipped. No explanation. When she pressed the call button, nothing happened. The light blinked, then turned off. She asked a passing flight attendant, a young man with nervously combed hair, "Can I speak to Captain, please?" He returned moments later. "I'm sorry, he's unavailable." "Is he aware of what's happening?" The head purser has informed him of the situation. "What situation?" she asked, her voice low-measured. "Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to discuss the captain's priorities." "Do you even know my name?" He blinked. "You're the passenger in 2A." "No," she said quietly. "I'm Thalassa Brink, and I asked a question." Her palms still tingled where she'd gripped her briefcase too tightly. Every glance toward the seat beside her, the one that should have belonged to her aunt, only reminded her of the smirk Velma had offered to the girl now half dozing beside her with headphones on. Still, she had told herself to wait, to breathe, to let it go until landing. But when Velma returned with another round of drinks and a small tray of assorted nuts for select passengers, and again skipped her without even pretending not to notice, Thalassa raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said with quiet firmness. Velma did not look at her. "Excuse me," Thalassa repeated. The flight attendant turned abruptly. "Yes, ma'am." The ma'am felt weaponized. "I haven't received water or any refreshments. I'd like to speak to the purser." Velma raised an eyebrow. "I am the purser, and we've had multiple issues already. Let's not make this any harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making it hard. I'm asking for the same service everyone else is receiving." "You've already been warned once about your tone." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thalassa stared. "My tone?" "Yes," Velma snapped, her voice rising. "You've been argumentative since you boarded. I've documented it. You questioned my integrity in front of passengers. That's a safety violation. We can divert this flight if it continues." Several heads turned. One man lifted his phone a little higher, pretending to check email while the front-facing camera pointed straight at Thalassa. "I didn't question your integrity," Thalassa said slowly. "I asked about a seat. That's not a crime." Velma leaned closer. "You raised your voice." "No," Thalassa said, feeling the strain in her jaw. "You escalated. You changed the rules and expected me to stay silent." "That's it," Velma said. "Please keep your hands where I can see them." "What?" Thalassa's eyebrows shot up. "Why would I? I'm asking you nicely," Velma said louder, ensuring the entire cabin could hear. "Do not reach for any equipment or staff. We've had incidents." "I haven't touched anything." Thalassa's voice cracked. Velma turned away dramatically, muttering into her walkie. Passenger in 2A continues to engage aggressively, not complying with verbal direction. Thalassa rose halfway out of her seat, reaching for her seatbelt to prove she was calm, rational, that she wasn't any kind of threat. But when she touched the metal buckle, Velma spun around and slapped her hand away with a sharp, audible snap. "Don't touch what isn't yours," she growled. The entire cabin fell into stunned silence. The man with the phone gasped quietly, angling his camera for a better shot. The girl beside Thalassa peeled one earbud out and said, "Whoa." A flight attendant at the front of the cabin turned but did not approach. "You assaulted me," Thalassa said, stunned. You touched the crew, Velma barked, ignoring the contradiction. I asked you not to. You were instructed to remain in your seat. I was in my seat. You made a lunge, Velma said. The captain will be notified. If you continue, we'll be forced to make an emergency landing. Thalassa sat back hard, heart pounding. She couldn't breathe. She hadn't moved violently. She hadn't raised her voice until now. But Velma had built the perfect trap, an escalating illusion of chaos where the victim appeared to be the problem. All Thalassa had done was ask for water, for dignity, for fairness. Now she was a threat, a potential diversion, and no one, not even the quiet passengers who knew what they had just seen, was stepping in. The man with the phone put it down slowly. The girl next to her whispered, "They're really doing you dirty." Then she rolled back toward the window, clearly uninterested in more. Velma stalked away, whispering to another attendant. Thalassa's hands trembled in her lap, not from fear, from the pressure of staying quiet under the weight of injustice. Behind her, she could hear murmurs. Someone said, "Always something with them." Another replied, "You can tell when they walk on the plane. They've got that edge." A third added, "Maybe she should fly private if she's so special." The words hit like fists, silent and sharp. She was trapped in a flying prison, surrounded by expensive upholstery and polite racism. And worst of all, she couldn't prove anything. Not yet. Not without becoming the stereotype they expected her to be. She looked out the window again. She wanted to scream, to cry, but she did neither. She sat still like a statue and kept her hands visible, her breathing quiet, her expression frozen. Velma returned 20 minutes later to serve dessert. The seat beside her remained occupied by the influencer, who'd long since fallen asleep under a fleece blanket provided just minutes before. Another courtesy Thalassa had quietly been denied. Her throat was dry, her chest tight. Her instincts screamed at her to get up, to remove herself from this circus of selective cruelty and orchestrated disgrace. But she knew, rationally, bitterly, that her silence had become her only defense. The moment she pushed back again, even politely, she'd be labeled disruptive, dangerous, defiant. She was playing their game by enduring the rules, however twisted. At least that's what she believed. Until Velma returned, flanked this time by a younger flight attendant who seemed hesitant to participate in whatever was about to happen. "Miss Brink," Velma announced, her voice louder than it needed to be, drawing the attention of the front rows. "The captain has requested you be temporarily relocated due to an escalation risk. We're moving you to a safer position." Thalassa blinked. "An escalation risk? I haven't done anything." "You refuse to comply with instructions. You've disrupted service. Please stand and follow me." "I didn't refuse anything," she said, her voice controlled but firm. "You slapped my hand away. I've remained seated and quiet ever since. And now I'm giving you a direct instruction," Velma snapped. "Stand up." Passengers looked up from their screens. Heads turned. Someone pulled out a phone, pretending to text while recording. "Ma'am," the younger attendant said softly, "please don't make this harder than it has to be." Thalassa looked around. There was no escape from the eyes, from the scrutiny. If she resisted, even to defend herself, the narrative would be sealed forever. So she stood, slowly, quietly, with every muscle in her back held tense as piano wire. "Thank you," Velma said, loud and triumphant. "Now if everyone could please remain seated. This passenger is being temporarily reassigned as an example of non-compliance protocols." "What?" Thalassa said, voice cracking for the first time. "You're making me an example?" Velma didn't respond to her directly. She gestured down the aisle. "Follow me." Thalassa turned and began walking, feeling every stare like heat on her back. Row by row, people turned their heads. She saw smirks, shrugs, a few eyes full of pity, but more full of judgment. Her chest burned. Her shoes clacked on the floor, too loud. As she passed the second section of business class, a man in 6C muttered, "Figures." A man behind him chuckled. Always a problem. And then came the clapping. slow, mocking applause from two men seated near the front of economy, who leaned into the aisle and smirked as she approached. "Round of applause," one of them said, "for our in-flight drama queen." "Enjoy, coach, sweetheart," the other added. Neither attendant reprimanded them. Velma simply looked over her shoulder with a smirk and said, "We appreciate your patience." Thalassa said nothing, her lips pressed into a flat line, her eyes locked forward. But her hands shook, her cheeks burned. Every step felt like another layer stripped from her identity. Not as a professional, not as a woman, but as a person who had dared to ask for dignity. They led her past the final passenger row to a space behind the galley, where the crew kept their meal carts and trash containers. A single jump seat bolted into the wall sat under a flickering overhead light. "This is not a passenger seat," Thalassa said, stunned. "It's not even near a window. It's FAA approved for emergency rotation," Velma said. "And it's the only one not in use. It's beside a trash chute." "And yet somehow," Velma said with icy satisfaction, "still considered a safer place for you than where you were." "This is illegal," Thalassa whispered. "I haven't broken any laws." "You're free to file a complaint," Velma replied, stepping back. "Enjoy your upgrade." The words dripped with venom. She turned and left, leaving Thalassa standing there like a ghost. The younger attendant lingered for a second, clearly uncomfortable, but then followed. Thalassa sat slowly on the hard wall-mounted chair. The belt was stiff, the view non-existent. The only smell was warm plastic, stale food, and bleach. From here, she could barely see another human. She was invisible, exactly as they wanted. For the rest of the flight, she wasn't offered food or water. No one checked on her. No one so much as asked if she was all right. A pair of crew members passed by occasionally, whispering to each other in rushed, cautious tones that went silent when they noticed she was watching. One bumped her knee with a cart and didn't apologize. She checked her watch. 2 more hours. Just 2 more hours of dehumanization, of isolation. The overhead light flickered in slow pulses, stuttering like a heartbeat on the edge of cardiac failure. And behind it, Velma Krieger's voice floated in and out from the intercom speaker as she updated the passengers about their altitude, their progress, the estimated time until descent, none of which mattered anymore to Thalassa, because she was no longer treated as a passenger. She was a disruption, a silent, contained disruption hidden from view, quietly erased from the privilege of presence. What Thalassa didn't yet know, however, was that her erasure had taken a far more sinister turn. While she remained locked in the humiliation of that jump seat, Velma had gone to work constructing a digital story to frame her actions in the worst possible light. Deep inside the crew terminal, she accessed the in-flight monitoring system, which logged cabin camera activity, customer flags, and audio snippets captured by the crew communication channels. Most attendants didn't bother with this tool unless there was a genuine incident, mechanical failure, an irate drunk, a medical emergency. But Velma wasn't interested in truth. She was interested in insulation. She clicked through timestamps, extracting a looped clip from earlier in the flight, zooming in on the moment Thalassa had reached for her seatbelt, cropping out the part where she was clearly complying, and selecting only the frame that showed her hand in motion while Velma's body angled away, as if flinching. Then she scrolled through the audio logs and clipped a half-sentence where Thalassa said, "This is illegal." With no context, it could sound threatening. She layered the 2 clips into the internal flight report, labeling the entry, "Passenger showed signs of physical escalation. Verbal aggression documented." She attached a note to the file, "Per captain's verbal clearance. Subject reassigned to FA designated seat, pending FAA review." It took her 12 minutes to do it. In 12 minutes, she had rewritten Thalassa's entire flight behavior, from calm protest to perceived threat. Meanwhile, Thalassa sat unaware that the walls around her reputation were being constructed in silence. She noticed, though, that her call button no longer worked. She pressed it once, then again. No light, no ding. A system lockout had been placed on her seat. She knocked on the wall of the galley when a crew member passed by. Darren, she thought his name was. A young man in his early 30s with dark-rimmed glasses and jittery hands. He saw her and kept walking. She raised her voice slightly. "Excuse me." He paused, pretended to check his cart, then whispered, "I'm not supposed to talk to you." "What?" "Velma said you were a Category 2. "What does that mean?" "Disruptive risk." "I haven't done anything disruptive." "She said you made threats." "She's lying." "I believe you," he whispered. "But she sent a report to the captain. It's locked now." "So I don't exist?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You exist," he said, looking away. "Just not on paper." He rolled his cart away before she could respond. Her hands trembled again, not from rage, from the chilling realization that she had been officially erased from access, from protocol, from credibility. She couldn't use the call button. She couldn't file a mid-flight complaint. She couldn't even ask for water without risking another report of noncompliance. The power Velma wielded wasn't just positional. It was systemic. The moment she marked Thalassa as a problem, the system kicked in like an immune response, sealing off the infection before asking if it was cancer or a bruise. Across the cabin, the whispers resumed. Velma walked through with performative grace, glancing into each row, dropping phrases like, "We're doing our best to handle the difficult situation, and these things are never easy, but our crew is trained for scenarios like this." Scenarios like this. Thalassa sat 10 feet from the galley, where she had just been labeled a threat and heard every word. Darren returned once more with coffee for another crew member, and his eyes found her again. "I'll leave something behind the panel," he muttered, sliding a protein bar behind a safety manual near her seat. Then he vanished. Thalassa stared at the packet. She hadn't eaten in 7 hours. But the gesture didn't comfort her. It enraged her. She shouldn't need a hidden protein bar to survive a 3-hour domestic flight. She wasn't a stowaway. She had paid. She had complied. And now she was being managed like cargo. When the lights in the cabin dimmed again for a rest period, she remained upright, eyes open, heart pounding. Velma returned one final time before descent, leaning casually against the panel near the curtain. "You should know," she said in a hush, "I've already flagged you in the system. You won't be boarding any priority cabin again without clearance." "You falsified your report," Thalassa replied, low and cold. "You edited footage to frame me. Good luck proving that." It was about slow erosion, a careful and measured dismantling of identity through 1,000 small denials. And it continued with methodical precision. As the attendants began circulating with snacks and drinks again, Thalassa heard their familiar ritual: the clink of ice scoops, the quiet shuffle of peanut packets, the polite murmur of "Would you like a drink?" and "chicken or pasta?" But none of those questions were directed her way. Her section, such as it was, didn't exist in the service manifest anymore. She pressed the manual release on her seatbelt and took a calculated step toward the curtain separating her from the rear of the aircraft, where the aisle crew had set up a temporary station with trays and jugs of water. She waited for a pause in the flow of passengers and gently asked the nearest crew member, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the name tag Mary Ann. "Excuse me," Thalassa said, her voice restrained and even. "May I please have a glass of water?" Mary Ann turned slightly, her eyes flashing uncertain recognition. "Miss Brink, I'm afraid we've been instructed. I'm dehydrated." Thalassa cut in calmly. "I haven't been served anything since boarding. I'm asking for water. Not champagne. Not an apology. Just hydration." Marian glanced toward the forward galley, where Velma stood with her arms folded, watching like a warden. Marianne sighed and nodded. "Just a second." She poured the water into a plastic cup with the Delta logo smeared slightly at the rim, walked it back to Thalassa, and extended it just as Velma stepped forward and intercepted her. "I'll take that," Velma said, all sugar and teeth. "We can't have inconsistent messages from the crew." Marianne hesitated, then handed over the glass. Velma turned to Thalassa, holding the cup with exaggerated care, then stepped forward and tilted it just enough so the water sloshed downward onto Thalassa's lap. Cold seeped into the fabric of her slacks instantly, soaking the upper thighs and waistband, spreading like a growing shame stain. Velma gasped theatrically. "Oh no, that was clumsy of me. Let me get you a tissue." But she didn't move. She stood and stared, satisfied, as Thalassa inhaled sharply and closed her eyes. The surrounding passengers had turned at the sound of the splash. Some gasped, others whispered. One woman shook her head and looked away, but not everyone did nothing. A child, maybe 7 or 8, sat in an aisle seat just behind the curtain, watching with wide eyes. He pointed, turned to his mother, and said, "Mommy, she got wet like a dog." His mother hushed him but didn't correct the statement. She pulled him back to his iPad without so much as a glance toward Thalassa. Velma finally dropped a napkin on the floor near Thalassa's shoes. "There you go. Clean up and maybe take a breath while you're at it. You're making people uncomfortable again." Thalassa didn't bend to retrieve the napkin. She stood still, dripping, the cup now empty and forgotten. The ice had soaked into her skin through the cotton lining, a cold ache that matched the one growing behind her sternum. Not from humiliation anymore, not even from rage, from clarity. This wasn't ordinary discrimination. This wasn't a bad flight or a miscommunication. This was targeted. This was designed. Every denial, every omission, every accident had a pattern, a fingerprint. And Velma Krieger was leaving hers everywhere. Thalassa stepped back into the curtain's shadow, refusing to give the crew the satisfaction of a breakdown. She reached into her coat and pulled out the small notepad she always carried, an old habit from her earlier days in investigative compliance, and began writing. She documented the water spill, the child's comment, the surrounding witnesses, the positioning of the curtain, and the body language of each participant. Behind the curtain, the cabin bustled with artificial calm, passengers sipping coffee, scrolling through movie options, some dozing, some whispering about the woman in the back. No one had dared to approach her, but that didn't stop them from staring every time the curtain flapped open or an attendant passed by. She was no longer a person in their eyes. She was a cautionary tale, a live example of what happened when you spoke too clearly, sat too tall, or asked to be treated with equal dignity. Her breath came slow and steady, practiced like a surgeon before incision. She was aware that anything less would be used against her. Every flicker of frustration, every slight lean forward or raised eyebrow would be another tick in the volatile column. The system wasn't waiting for her to explode. It was begging for it, and that made her refusal even more damning to them. Then it happened. As Darren passed by again with a tray of used cups, he paused for half a second and let a folded napkin slide from beneath his sleeve, as if by accident. It landed beside her foot, face down. He didn't look back. She waited until the aisle cleared, then reached for the napkin and slowly unfolded it. Inside, written in a faint smudge of red lipstick, were the words, "They think you're a threat to their illusion." No name, no signature, just a single sentence that cracked through the armor of silence like a whispered scream. It was the first confirmation that someone understood, not just that they saw the injustice, but that they recognized the deeper machinery at work. It wasn't just about prejudice or policy abuse. It was about control, about preserving the illusion that the world was neat, orderly, and comfortable, as long as people like her remained in their place. She stared at the napkin, folding it carefully and tucking it into her notebook. That small piece of resistance, that flicker of rebellion from an unnamed stranger, meant more than 1,000 apologies would have. But it also signaled something more dangerous. If others knew what was happening, so did Velma. And if Velma felt her illusion slipping, she would tighten the grip. Not 2 minutes later, the overhead intercom crackled to life. Velma's voice, clear and calm and laced with false professionalism, rang out across the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your cooperation as we begin our initial descent into Seattle. Due to an onboard disturbance involving a volatile passenger, we will be taking additional safety precautions. We appreciate your patience." The words hit the air like a bomb. Every seat seemed to shift. Heads turned. Seat belts clicked tighter. The word volatile had done its job. Thalassa could feel it from her place near the galley. The shift in energy. The tightening fear. The fear wasn't of turbulence or technical error. It was fear of her, of the unknown variable she represented. She was now officially labeled unstable, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous, all without having raised her voice above conversational tone. Velma's game was complete, and she had just broadcast it to every soul on the plane. A mother pulled her child into her lap. A man across the aisle put away his laptop and stared directly toward the galley curtain, waiting. Even the other attendants, who had tiptoed around Thalassa for most of the flight, now glanced in her direction like she was a ticking bomb. It was happening again. The illusion of control required a villain, and Velma had painted her perfectly. But Thalassa didn't flinch. She sat straighter, uncrossed her arms, and closed her notebook softly. The time for writing was nearly over. Thalassa, seated upright in the rear galley's cold utility chair, felt the full gravity of this label settle over her shoulders like steel plating. The curtain separating her from the cabin remained closed, not to protect her, but to protect others from her. So the story went. Yet behind that curtain, things were moving. Velma sat at her station, reviewing her notes, scrolling through her report log on the crew tablet. With mechanical confidence, she initiated a pre-landing security alert for SeaTac Airport, flagging one passenger under suspicion of verbal threat and seatbelt aggression, to be met on arrival by ground enforcement. Her tone was casual, her keystrokes confident. She had done this before. She clicked submit, and with a quiet sigh, leaned back with a self-satisfied smile. Meanwhile, in the shadow of the galley, where she had been relegated, Thalassa shifted. She reached slowly into her carry-on, unzipped an inner pocket, and withdrew a flat, sealed envelope wrapped in metallic fiber. She had carried it for years and rarely revealed it, but she always knew a day would come when it would be necessary. She opened the envelope and slid out a polished, laminated card no larger than a standard ID. Its surface shimmered faintly in the dim light, marked with a gold seal. The Department of Civil Aviation Oversight. Thalassa Brink, Senior Audit Officer. Clearance level, for B, Executive Oversight. It wasn't a badge of rank. It was a scalpel of accountability. She had earned it after 6 years of federal work examining violations in private airline operations, reviewing crew compliance, and identifying abuse of power and passenger manipulation. Her name had crossed Velma Krieger's file twice in prior audits, though she had never been assigned her directly, until today. Today, Velma had unknowingly triggered an emergency flag in the oversight system when she filed her fabricated report using Thalassa's TSA-linked passenger record. The system cross-referenced her identity and issued an instant silent ping to the captain's console, notifying him that a federally flagged clearance holder was on board and under administrative duress. It was rare enough that most captains had never seen it activate. But when it did, protocol changed. The cockpit alert blinked quietly in front of Captain Reinhold, who glanced down, confused. "What's this?" he asked his co-pilot. The junior officer read the display, then widened his eyes. "That's an internal audit marker. Level 4. We have a federal oversight agent on board. In first class." "Not in first class," Reinhold muttered. "That's the same seat Velma filed a disturbance report from." He tapped the panel. "She's seated behind the galley now. Why is she down there?" The co-pilot hesitated. "Should we radio ground security?" "No," Reinhold said, flipping to the agent detail log. "This isn't a threat marker. It's a red flag, crew escalation against a credentialed officer. We're the ones being audited." The cockpit fell silent. "You'd better call Velma up here," Reinhold said. "Now." In the back, Thalassa remained still, the ID placed carefully atop her knee. She didn't wave it. She didn't announce herself. Her name had already spoken for her. She waited. 30 seconds later, Velma's intercom clicked. "Chief Purser Krieger, flight deck, please." Her smile faltered. She stood, tucked the tablet under her arm, and walked forward, unaware that her story was about to fall apart like the cheap mask it had always been. Thalassa listened to her footsteps fade up the aisle. She stayed seated, calm, controlled, composed. The storm she had weathered over the past hours wasn't ending. It was turning. And for the first time all flight, the aircraft no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a courtroom. The illusion Velma had worked so hard to construct, The narrative of a dangerous, belligerent passenger being handled by professional staff was crumbling under the weight of data, identity, and truth. In the cockpit, Velma stepped inside with her usual confidence. "Captain." "Shut the door," he said. She frowned but obeyed. "We've had a bit of a situation with a woman in 2A," she began. "I filed the incident report already. We flagged it as noncompliance, potential verbal threat, and seatbelt interference." "Stop talking," Reinhold said. Velma blinked. "Sir." "Do you know who Thalassabrink is?" he asked. "Passenger 2A. Then reassigned. Some consultant, I think." She got mouthy. "She's a federal agent, Velma. Civil aviation oversight. Your report just triggered an emergency notification to the FAA logbook." Velma's face drained of color. "That's impossible." "If she is," Reinhold cut in. "And you've just accused her of being a threat." The plane's wheels screeched against the Seattle runway with a jarring finality that echoed through the cabin. But this landing was unlike any Thalassabrink had ever experienced. She remained in the galley jump seat, her posture still, her expression unreadable, though inside, the precision of her training had shifted into full effect. The badge remained tucked safely in its protective case, the envelope resealed and hidden once more in her carry-on, but the ripple it had created had already altered the course of everything. The pilot's sharp order to summon Velma to the cockpit hadn't gone unnoticed by the cabin crew. Their murmurs, hushed, uncertain, had spread among the aisles. Darren, passing her once more with a stiff nod, avoided eye contact now, but his nervous glance toward the front of the plane betrayed that something had shifted. Velma hadn't returned. That silence spoke volumes. As the plane taxied toward the gate, an uneasy quiet settled over the cabin. Then, the intercom clicked again, not Velma's voice this time, but the captain's, steady and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. There will be a slight delay in deplaning. I repeat, please remain seated." A murmur passed through the rows like the beginning of a storm. "We would like to take a moment to inform you that one of our passengers today is flying under the authority of the Department of Civil Aviation Oversight. Miss Thalassabrink is a senior audit officer with federal clearance. Her presence on this flight has been part of an internal systems compliance evaluation. We thank you for your cooperation during this process." The cabin froze. The air changed. A long second passed before the implications of the announcement reached everyone. Some passengers turned to look toward the rear galley with new eyes. Others simply blinked in disbelief. In first class, the influencer girl slowly removed her earbuds, confused, and whispered, "She's what?" A man near row 7 muttered, "Jesus Christ, we did this in front of a Fed." In the cockpit, Velma's hands trembled on her lap. She didn't show any credentials. She didn't say anything she didn't have to, Reinhold said coldly. Her ID pinged. The system confirmed her. "You falsified a report on a federal officer." "I didn't mean to. That won't help you now." He opened a private communication channel to the ground team. "Gate 32B, we are requesting immediate FAA compliance contact. Officer 4B is on board, audit confirmed. One purser flagged for misconduct. Repeat, misconduct under flight authority violation." Velma's mouth parted, but no sound emerged. The power she had wielded for hours evaporated in a breath. At the terminal, several gate agents stepped back as 4 FAA enforcement officials, crisp uniforms and dark windbreakers marked with gold agency lettering, stepped onto the jet bridge. A silent acknowledgement passed between them and the captain. Reinhold nodded and pressed the intercom again. "All passengers, please remain seated. Law enforcement personnel will be boarding shortly. Please do not interfere with official actions." As the cabin doors opened, the team stepped on board with brisk authority, moving with purpose. The passengers leaned into the aisles to see. Some tried to shrink from a spectacle. Others recorded on their phones. The agents moved directly to the cockpit, then turned as Velma emerged slowly, escorted by the co-pilot. "Miss Krieger," one agent said, "you are being removed from this aircraft under suspicion of falsified safety reporting and crew misconduct." "Wait, this is a misunderstanding," Velma stammered, her voice high and thin. "I was just following protocol. You altered internal documentation," the agent said flatly. "You filed a false security threat against a federal officer. You are not under arrest at this time, but you will be detained for questioning." "I didn't know." She didn't look. Velma stopped herself, too late. One of the agents raised an eyebrow. "Didn't look what?" he asked. But she had no answer. The silence after that question was the loudest moment of the entire flight. She was led off the plane, stiff, pale, stripped of her badge and earpiece. Her dignity left behind with the passengers who had seen everything. Some of them applauded softly, not for her removal, but perhaps for the quiet justice of it. Others simply watched, stunned, silent, as the woman who had dominated the flight with icy control vanished down the jet bridge like a ghost. Then the intercom clicked one final time. "Miss Brink, you are now clear to disembark. Thank you for your discretion." Thalassa rose. She stepped forward calmly, collecting her briefcase. As she moved up the aisle, passengers leaned back to let her pass, no longer indifferent, no longer skeptical. They looked at her with a mix of guilt, respect, and awe. A few murmured apologies. One woman in row 4 said, "I'm so sorry for not saying anything." Thalassa nodded, but said nothing. Forgiveness wasn't hers to give. Not yet. As she stepped off the plane, her stride even and head held high, the compliance officers flanked the walkway, each giving a small nod. At the terminal, an FAA liaison approached. "Agent Brink, ground review room is ready when you are. We'll begin with the flight data pull." "Let's move quickly," Thalassa replied. "I've got a full report to submit before midnight." The liaison smiled, holding the door. "Welcome back, ma'am." And just like that, the woman they tried to erase became the woman no one could ignore. Within 12 hours of the incident, the FAA released a formal preliminary statement identifying the crew member involved in an internal compliance conflict with a Level 4B oversight officer, naming Krieger specifically and announcing her immediate suspension pending full investigation. The statement was clinical but unmistakable. It made clear that this was not routine. This was federal. The consequences were already unfolding behind closed doors. At the Regional Flight Union office in Seattle, Velma sat across from 3 board members who refused to meet her eyes. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain. "It was a misunderstanding. I was following protocol." She was aggressive. She made passengers uncomfortable. "We've reviewed the cabin security footage," one board member interrupted coldly. "We also have audio." "You're taking it out of context," Velma insisted, but her voice broke mid-sentence. "The context is clear," another said. "You slapped a seated passenger's hand away from her seatbelt. You accused her of being a threat with no verifiable cause. Then you altered a crew report to escalate the narrative." Velma looked down, her voice now barely audible. "She didn't look like an officer." "You mean she looked black?" the third board member said sharply. Velma's head jerked up. "That's not what I say it or don't. It's already in the report." The union statement that afternoon stunned even those within the aviation community. "While we support our members' rights and responsibilities on board, we cannot, and will not, defend the manipulation of protocol to mask personal bias. Ms. Krieger's actions represent a breach of public trust, federal conduct standards, and passenger safety expectations." She was cut off. No defense, no legal shield. Her face flooded the news cycle within hours, not as a martyr of overregulation, but as the latest casualty of unchecked power meeting unexpected accountability. Meanwhile, Thalassa Brink was already deep into the debrief. At a quiet, heavily secured FAA facility just beyond SeaTac's main concourse, she reviewed the security footage frame by frame with 2 federal analysts. "Pause here," she said, pointing. "This is the slap. You can see the crew member's fingers, open-palmed, striking her hand." "Confirmed," the analyst said. "Angle from the front confirms contact." "Audio overlay here," she continued. "Note her tone. Measured. She says, 'I haven't touched anything.' That's the moment before the lie entered the report." "Timeline matches the voice file," the other analyst replied. "All edits were made post-event. Krieger tagged it manually." No automated trigger. Thalassa nodded, satisfied. She tapped her notebook, her handwritten journal from a flight, and opened to the folded napkin with a lipstick message. "Find this person," she said. "They witnessed the escalation. They risked something to warn me. I want their testimony protected." But the most compelling evidence didn't come from crew records or agency files. It came from seat 12C. A passenger, a man in his mid-30s named Bradley Young, had captured more than 10 minutes of footage on his phone during the interaction between Thalassa and Velma. He'd initially started filming out of curiosity, but once the slap happened, his instincts changed. "I just couldn't believe it," he told reporters. "You see something like that, and you know it's wrong. I didn't think she was going to do it until she did. It was loud, sharp. You could feel the air shift." His video, unedited, time-stamped, and steady, captured everything. Velma's tone, Thalassa's calm responses, the backhanded slap, and the audible gasp from surrounding passengers. When it surfaced online, the footage went viral within hours. Hashtag Flight 338 trended on every platform. The video was viewed 3.1 million times within the first 24 hours. Thousands of comments poured in. Some expressed outrage. Others confessed shame for ever having doubted her. "I saw her move toward the galley. She didn't even flinch," one woman posted. "She held her dignity like armor." "This wasn't about attitude," another wrote. "This was about race, power, and punishment, and she handled it like a queen." But it wasn't just social justice warriors or journalists dissecting the video. Federal legal counsel used it. The footage was formally entered into the investigation. The audio cross-referenced with Velma's written report. It validated everything Thalassa had noted in her journal. Her memory was exact. Her record bulletproof. She had been silenced, ridiculed, isolated, and she had responded with documentation, precision, and discipline. The weeks following the FAA's announcement turned into months of consequence. News cycles that once swirled with righteous anger began settling into retrospectives, analyzing Flight 338 not just as a moment of injustice, but as a cautionary tale, a snapshot of silent complicity, weaponized perception, and the terrifying ease with which a woman could be discredited, erased, and nearly broken, all under the guise of policy. While Thalassa Brink quietly returned to her position at the Department of Civil Aviation Oversight, declining interviews, avoiding memoir offers, and rejecting political endorsements, the echoes of her restraint echoed louder than any podium speech. She became a symbol not because she sought it, but because she didn't need it. Her silence on the matter became its own form of protest, composed, rooted in evidence, impossible to discredit. Behind closed doors, she continued her work, conducting internal reviews, auditing flight protocol, mentoring younger auditors on identifying bias hidden within routine procedures. She made no public commentary on Velma's name. She did not tweet, did not write op-eds. But her name, her presence, now haunted every corporate training manual and HR workshop across major airline brands. In contrast, Velma Krieger's fall was swift and merciless. After her suspension, legal review of her actions led to permanent termination from the airline. The union, stung by public backlash and internal criticism, distanced themselves entirely, citing breach of ethical conduct and falsification of safety reports. Her personal life unraveled just as fast. Friends she once entertained with airport gossip now whispered about her instead. Neighbors avoided her gaze. A few former colleagues sent private messages of sympathy, but none publicly defended her. She had become the face of reckoning, an image that flashed across training slides titled, "When Authority Fails." Job applications returned silence. Online searches revealed pages of headlines, memes, and editorial takes dissecting her behavior. She tried to volunteer. Most organizations declined. Some didn't reply at all. One HR coordinator even apologized, saying her presence would be a trigger. She began therapy, not out of obligation, but because the shame refused to dull. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the captain's voice over the intercom. She saw Thalassa rise from the back of the plane, not in anger, not in vindication, but in calm dignity. That image, so silent, so undeniable, was the one that would not leave her. Then, one morning 6 months after the incident, a package arrived at her apartment. No return address. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a photocopy of a handwritten audit journal, the very one Thalassa had scribbled in behind the galley wall. The pages were annotated with soft pencil notes. Not accusations, not reminders of failure, just quotes, quiet quotes, phrases like "power reveals the user," and "dignity isn't what you're given, it's what you choose to hold." One line was underlined: "Justice doesn't humiliate, it restores." Velma held the journal for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize out loud. She just stared, reading the pages slowly, absorbing the quiet weight of accountability not enforced through vengeance, but offered through clarity. That night, she wrote a letter, not to Thalassa, but to herself. She wrote about her need for control, her fear of being seen as powerless, her inability to acknowledge her own bias. It was 5 pages. She burned it afterward, not to erase it, but to make space for something else. A month later, she applied for a program coordinator position at a nonprofit focused on racial equity in public systems. She didn't lie on the application. She wrote, "I am responsible for the events that led to my dismissal. I hope to earn the right to be useful again, not to speak, but to listen." The board reviewed her file with hesitation, then invited her to an in-person interview as part of a restorative hiring initiative. She arrived nervous but prepared, hair pulled back, suit modest, resume clutched like a confession. She was guided to a small room with a circular table. 3 women sat at the panel. One of them didn't speak. She just watched. Her posture was poised. Her hands rested calmly on the folder before her. Velma's stomach dropped. It was her, Thalassa. No title, no badge, just presence. She didn't say a word during the interview, didn't glare, didn't smile. She simply observed. When it ended, the other 2 women thanked Velma and said they would follow up within the week. Velma stood to leave, then turned, heart pounding, and said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to be better. If you say no, I'll understand." Thalassa didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her silence had always spoken louder than any words. A week later, Velma received an email. The subject line read, "Welcome to the work." No fanfare, no lecture, just a chance. She started in the archives, logging historical cases of transport bias, organizing policy papers, running errand work no one else wanted. She said nothing in meetings. She stayed late, cleaned up, studied. Some volunteers didn't recognize her. Others did. No one spoke the plane. No one had to. A year passed. One afternoon, the nonprofit hosted a panel discussion on civilian oversight in transportation. Thalassa was the keynote speaker. Velma stood at the back of the room, clipboard in hand, managing chairs and refreshments. When Thalassa took the mic, she opened with a quote, "The hardest justice is not punishing the guilty. It's offering them the space to change." She didn't look at Velma, but she didn't have to. Velma's eyes welled up, but she blinked it back. Not shame, gratitude. Not for a second chance at status, but for a first chance at understanding. The room applauded. And for the first time in a long while, Velma clapped too. Not because she was expected to, but because she meant it. The end. If this story moved you or made you think, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful narrative. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the plot twists? Did Velma's transformation feel genuine to you? And where are you watching or reading this from? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Your insight helps shape what comes next.